So now we're ready for the moment we've all been waiting for. November's election result has made a major impact on the Federal Reserve's outlook for 2025 and beyond, both in terms of projected future interest rate cuts and the profile for future inflation. Dr. Raphael Bostic several years ago warned us not to use the T word of transitory when thinking about inflation. I can't wait to hear about his thinking on today's T word of tariffs. As you all saw, these escalated rather dramatically over the weekend, subsided early this morning, but I guess that's just what central bankers have to deal with these days. Let me remind you about Dennis Lockhart's stellar career for the very few of you who don't know Dennis. He is currently a distinguished professor of the practice in the Nunn School of International Affairs at Georgia Tech. He serves on 4 for-profit company boards and various non-profit advisory boards. He also chairs Emory's Brain Health Center Advisory Council. Early in 2017, he stepped down from the position of president and CEO of the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. In this role, Lockhart served on the Federal Reserve's chief monetary policy body, the Federal Open Market Committee, all making him uniquely qualified to moderate our conversation today. Before becoming a central banker, Dennis was a member of the faculty of Georgetown University's Walsh School of Foreign Service, where he chaired the master's program's concentration in global commerce and finance, as well as international business government relations. Dennis was born and grew up in California. He was educated at Stanford University and the Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies. He also attended the senior executive program at the Sloan School of Management at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And he also served as an officer of the U.S. Marine Corps Reserve, so thank you for your service. He also holds an honorary doctorate from Georgia State University. So Dennis, if you'll do us the favor of coming onto the stage and introducing Dr. Raphael, we can't wait to hear what you have to say about that T word.
Well, thank you, President Adrian, and welcome to so many guests today. My introduction of Raphael Bostic is going to be short because I've been doing this now for 7 or 8 years, so it's getting kind of weary. I'm getting kind of tired of it. But so I'll do this from memory, but Raphael grew up in New Jersey, got his bachelor's degree in economics and psychology at Harvard University, PhD in economics at Stanford University. First job, I believe, was, what's that, RK? Sorry. First job was at the Board of Governors in Washington. I think he spent some time at the Treasury Department in that capacity. Very importantly, in Raphael's career, he's been at the Housing and Urban Development Department twice, most recently in the Obama administration. Very strong background in housing and urban economics. After government service, he went to University of Southern California. There are a whole bunch on his bio, a whole bunch of different titles he had at USC, and then was recruited to succeed me and join the Federal Reserve in June of 2017. So it's been 8 years now. Hard to believe. Now, a fun fact about Raphael. He loves jazzy socks. You know, Raphael, I really don't know about this. You're supposed to project seriousness and the credibility of the inflation target, and then you wear these socks. I'll leave it there. Please join me in welcoming Raphael Bostic.
Show me some blade. All right, Raphael.
Well, you're not going to just... It looks good.
We did not coordinate this.
No. But with Dennis...
I got these out of my drawer where they stay most of the time. And they say Rotary on the bottom.
These are Rotary socks.
Yeah.
Fully appropriate for the moment.
Okay, I have I've prepared today 2 lines of questioning. And you can choose which line you want.
All right, so which one should I do?
You're going to knock it out of the park regardless. So.
Thank you very much.
All right, so let's get started. And I don't know which line I'm going to follow here. So let's talk a little bit about uncertainty. The central bankers always face a significant amount of uncertainty, but we're in special times. Can you talk about sort of how you would characterize the uncertainty picture that you're facing?
Well, first of all, good afternoon, everyone. It's very good to be here again. Good to see you. I want to thank the program for adjusting the calendar so I could trade off my usual January slot for my February slot, and thank all of you for bearing with me and showing up today. In terms of uncertainty, I like the way you posed it, is that we always live with uncertainty, and it's always around us. But as we live, as I live, there are certain types of uncertainty that you just get comfortable on. Driving down the road, or any number of things, and they don't send ripples into your outlook for the world. What I would say is, during my tenure in this role, I feel like the degree of uncertainty has broadened considerably. I used to say I really understood exactly how the world worked. I could predict sort of what types of outcomes were possible and which ones had no chance of playing out. I don't say that anymore. And it's because the set of things that have happened over the last 4 or 5 years, there was no way any of them were going to be on my list. A global pandemic, a ground war in Europe, a wide range of things that just weren't there. And so that's kind of, I've evolved to a place where I try not to be too certain that I know what's going to happen a month from now, a quarter from now, or 6 months from now, but rather I'm really trying to do much more precise and sophisticated real-time discernment of where people are. And if you think about today's environment, ton of uncertainty in a bunch of spaces, like the T word, that's one, and even that landscape has changed in the last hour, right? And so how do you incorporate that into an outlook becomes incredibly challenging. But there are a host of other things, many of them generating from Washington, but you think about sort of the wildfires in Los Angeles and Southern California. That is going to be massively disruptive in ways that will have implications for a very large economy and part of our United States that will ripple to other places. And we're going to have to figure out how to navigate that. But it makes our job, on some level, much harder. But on some level, it makes it easier, in the sense that when people ask me what's my outlook, I can just...
Yeah, but people didn't come today to hear you dodge the question of your outlook. So at least base case, what's your outlook for the year?
So here's what I would say on the outlook. And I think it's useful to go back to December 31st. We had just finished our last meeting, and I was at a place where I felt like the labor market was working. It was pretty solid. It had been super tight. It had weakened off a little bit, but it had stabilized. We were seeing wage growth, that year-over-year wage increase, return to pre-pandemic levels. The Kansas City Fed has a labor market indicator. It was showing that it's an aggregation of a bunch of measures, and it basically said that we're back to pre-pandemic levels. Inflation was high, But we had taken a lot of action. We had reduced our policy rate, well, we had raised it up. And now we're trying to recalibrate it so that when inflation got to our 2% target, we would be positioned to be at a neutral rate. And that recalibration was going smoothly. The economy was not moving in a crazy way. And the broader economy was resilient. So GDP maintained its strength. Consumers were continuing to participate and be active in the economy. And many were very confident. When I talked to a lot of business leaders, very confident about where the year was going. Their outlook was 2025 was going to be about the same as 2024. They weren't expecting a lot of disruptions. They were not worried about finding workers if someone were to leave. And that seemed like a very straightforward and orderly pace. So then the question then becomes, okay, if that's the outlook that you would have under ordinary circumstances with nothing unusual happening, what do you do? Like, how do you take on and incorporate the wide range of unusual that could happen? What I've tried to do is not really prejudge that answer and to say, okay, I'm going to hold that outlook that I had. And it's basically GDP is going to remain strong, the labor market is going to remain solid, inflation will continue its path to the 2% target. And then I'm just going to have a little clipboard with a list of possible things and then try to wait and see what happens before getting too far ahead. Because if I have my team pick 3 of them and none of those 3 happen, then that's work that's not resources. Those aren't resources that have been well deployed. And because we've seen things change so rapidly and in so many different dimensions, for me, I think the most important thing we can do right now is just make sure we have that clipboard going, right? And start to ask questions of our business contacts, of folks like you in the room. Like, if this happened, what would you do? If that happened, what would you do? If this happened and that other thing happened, like, what do you think your customers would do? Just so we start to get a sense of the broader, I'm going to econ term, reaction function of the people who are the agents of our economy, which are business leaders, families, and those are the folks who really drive this thing. And so we really we're set up well to do this. We have a team that goes out and talks to folks all the time, unstructured, so we can be agile in terms of getting to topics and that you don't have to stick to a script. We do a lot of surveys, and we're continuously adding new questions in the surveys so that we can get information in real time for where people are. And that gives us, and it gives me a better opportunity to really have my finger on the pulse of things so that as things change, I can have good instincts and our team can have good instincts about what's likely to happen.
When I was in the role, we mostly based policy decisions off of a forecast. So we were forward-looking because monetary policy works with a lag. What I hear you saying is, by necessity, you're going to be more reactive to data. You're always data dependent, but you're going to see how things unfold and then react. Is that fair to say?
So I'll say it a little differently. On one level, you're exactly right in the sense that most of the models that we've had that we would use to do those forecasts, you can't really apply them as well because the context that we're living in today is so different than the context when those models were built. Right? So those models were predicated on relationships between different factors where there are good reasons to think those relationships are not the same today. Right, so if you use a model that assumes relationships that are not prevailing, that model's not going to do you a lot of good. Right, it can be a guide, but you're going to have to tweak it and adjust it. And so that's the world we live in today. You know, if you think about the pandemic, the tremendous policy response to sort of mitigate the worst possible outcomes has meant that businesses and consumers are much stronger in terms of their balance sheet than they usually would at this time in a cycle. And so how they would respond to different kinds of changes in the environment is just going to be different. So what we do, because we need to be forward-looking, is that we've started, I mentioned our surveys, we now have surveys where we ask, what's your projection of what your sales are going to be a year from now, 6 months from now? Are you worried about labor markets in the next quarter? How are you thinking about your customer sentiment, and how do you think they'd respond if you moved prices 10% in the next 18 months? So we try to do that to start to build a contemporaneous model of how the economy is likely to evolve with different stimuli. So I can't point to like a hard equation in the way that you could in previous eras, but we are trying to, as much as possible, get that forward look. And I'm sure you're going to ask about tariffs. We've asked a lot of questions about if tariffs were to hit, what would you do? Like, how would you respond to it? And the answers have been quite interesting.
You have two objectives, low and stable prices or low inflation and maximum employment. Is one more important than the other at the moment? I would sort of guess that you're still got your eye on inflation.
You're guessing exactly right. For 3 years, I've said inflation is high, it's too high, and we need to get it back to target. It is not yet back to target. So that statement still stands. I think the thing that I'm very grateful for is that, at one point inflation was in 7, 8, 9%. Now it's in the high 2s. That's tremendous progress. But progress isn't success. And we need to get to 2%. I think it's critical just for the credibility of our institution. We've been talking about this for years now. If we just threw up our hands, we're good enough, that can allow the possibility that people start to get cynical. They start to doubt, they might not take these things so seriously, and they can lose confidence in us as an institution. And I don't want that to happen. So we're committed to getting to that 2% target. And then the other thing I would just say on the labor market, right now, unemployment is at levels that for much of my professional career, economists didn't think could happen without inflation going out of control. Right? And what we've learned is that the economy can support a much tighter labor market than people understood, and that means that as long as it's staying in that space, our job is just to make sure it stays in that space. And so if you have two things, one's on target and one's not, you worry more about the one that's not on target, but you always keep your eye on the one that is, because you don't just want to trade positions. You want to try as much as possible to get both of them where you want them to be.
So we're here in February 2025, and you're focused on inflation. I would argue it's maybe a little bit ambiguous whether inflation is stuck or inflation is going to resume disinflation. So is inflation stuck, do you think?
So I hope not. So I would say this. My outlook is for inflation to continue falling towards the 2% target. I'm not expecting it's going to be like a straight line, steady progression. I'm expecting, the word I've been using is bumpy. In the building, I use the word janky. Like, however you want to describe it, it's going to be something that is going to bounce around a bit, but in a general trend. That's my outlook. Now, if you look at the numbers, there's a case you could make that for the last 3 to 6 months, inflation hasn't really moved very much. And so some would say, well, no, this isn't the path. But there are technical reasons why that's true, and then there are some other reasons. The one I would point to is that the key component that has made inflation measures stuck, if you wanted to say, has been housing. And the way housing goes into our preferred measure, which is the Personal Consumption Expenditure Index, housing prices haven't gone down very much. Inflation is still quite high, in the PCE measure. But that is different than any other measure you look at. Like if you want to go to the Zillow or the Case-Shiller or whatever, they all show that house prices, the rate of change of house has come down quite a bit and is close to where you would expect it to be. And if it got there, then we would be basically at 2%. And so there's been a lot of discussion we've had in the building is, why is this one staying so stubborn, right? And should we expect it to at some point come into conformity with what everywhere else is showing? And that's the conversation we're having. I actually think that there's a compelling reason why you would think that's the case, but you can't assume that that's what's going to happen. So we have to stay on top of it. We got to keep watching. We got to keep monitoring and doing some research and analytics to try to understand that. So that's baseline. Now, I want to add one other thing, which is all this uncertainty, right? Because this uncertainty adds another dynamic that you have to figure out how to incorporate into your expectation about what's likely to happen. And so if you think about the T-word stuff, most economists, when they do their research, they suggest that that would put upward pressure on prices, right? It turns out to be very complicated, but there are others who would focus on a lot of deregulation that they think is going to happen, which could unleash investment and productivity, which would put downward pressure on prices. Right? So there are a lot of moving parts here, and our job is really to, as much as possible, keep tabs on it so we can do the proper accounting and then position our policy appropriately.
You know, every few weeks we get inflation data, and the public generally understands that the PCE index core is sort of the favorite, that's called the favorite indicator of inflation for the Federal Reserve. But you and I know that there are 2 or 3 dozen different ways of cutting inflation. And how do you do it? How do you evaluate where inflation is at any given time?
All right, so the PCE is our target. So I don't want folks to think that we just ignore the thing that we say is our target. But you're exactly right, there are a ton of ways you can measure this. And at different points in time, the range of measurements might tell kind of a nuanced story that can be helpful for informational purposes. So we actually created a tool that is accessible to all of you. Hopefully you all are subscribed to the Atlanta Fed and you're getting this tool, so I'm telling you things you already know, right? Right. You heard that was, that was a nervous mumble. So the tool is the underlying inflation dashboard. And what we've done is we've shown like 8 or 10 different ways that you might calculate inflation, and we say what those measures are showing. And then we've done a translation to say, if 2% is our PCE target, then for this measure, the equivalent is 2.4 or whatever it is. And then we color code to show, like, is this on target? Is it above the target? Is it below the target? So you can see in the range of things what the collective story around inflation looks like. We built this because right before the pandemic, the PCE measure was actually the weakest one. It was the furthest from target. And all the other translations were almost exactly on it. And I felt, and our team felt, that we wanted to make sure that the right narrative was out there, that there were large parts of the economy that were working as desired, and this one is a little different. And so we want to have that conversation and drive that awareness. Now it turned out, as soon as we did that, the pandemic happened, inflation went up and everything's red. But what's happened in the last, as inflation starts to normalize, we're starting to get to a place where there's variation across these things again. So you can actually start to see for yourselves the full landscape and then make a judgment about what you think it means and how you should act and respond in response to that.
You described the employment market as hot in a certain way. Certainly it's continued to be very robust. What's your outlook for employment? Do you expect it to gradually get softer, and what will you protect as a committee?
So that's a hard question to answer. And I guess I would say my outlook is for the labor market, for the job market, to remain solid. Robust, I like the use of that word in the sense that workers feel like they can get jobs that pay well. Employers feel like if they have a need, they can go into the labor market, find what they need. The labor market will not be a constraint for anyone to do the things that they want to do. But at the same time, it's not putting pressure on firms to where they feel like, if I have to pay a certain wage, then I got to raise my prices. It's not disruptive in that way. So that is like a baseline. There's uncertainty here as well, though, because we know that through the pandemic, businesses made lots of investments. And remember, 2-3 years ago, the labor market was super hot, and nobody even wanted to lay anybody off. They didn't want to let people go because they weren't confident that they could find workers again. So a number of businesses responded by saying, okay, I don't want to feel so exposed in that regard, so I'm going to invest in things. So you've been to restaurants where robots now bring you your food, that kind of stuff. That kind of investment has happened all over the place, which then has implications for the need for workers in the future, but it also has implications for the productivity of the workers that you have. And so in both of those instances, this is an evolving story. And one of the things we'll need to do over the next 12 to 18 months is really get a sense of where are managers, CEOs, CFOs landing in terms of what's the equation for what they need for workers. But that's a longer arc. And it's one that we talk about, there are temporal changes and there are structural changes. This could actually represent a pretty significant structural change that then can endure and position the economy to be quite productive.
I can read some of the faces in the audience that, some people are thinking, quit beating around the bush. Just tell us what's going to happen to interest rates this year. So what's going to happen to interest rates this year? What's the path of policy?
I was thinking as I was walking up, every time I come on stage with Dennis, he gets irreverent, right? And so he never disappoints. So for interest rates, here's what I would say on this. I want to see what the 100 basis points of reduction that we did the end of last year translates to in terms of the economy. And it could, depending on what the data are, it might mean that we are waiting for a while. I would say where I am today is, I had uncertainty on December 31st. The amount of uncertainty that we have today is greater than that. All right, and I want to be cautious, and I don't want to have our policy lean in a direction, making an assumption that the economy is going to evolve a certain way, that then I have to turn and unwind. All right, so I'm really taking the posture that I'm going to have to wait and see. And there are a lot of things I'm going to have to wait and see about before I'll feel confident that I know which direction policy can go. My general outlook is that we're going to get to target, and we want to get our rates to neutral. And neutral, I think, is lower than where we are now, somewhere in the 3 to 3.5% level. But how long should it take for us to get there? Actually depends on what happens, on how this economy evolves over the next 12 to 18 months. And there's enough uncertainty that I'm not really confident today I can walk in any direction. And so what I would say is I'm prepared and I'm comfortable and I'd be very satisfied to wait for a while, right? And that would be fine, but it depends on what happens, right? And if things happen and evolve such that it's very clear where the economy is going, I'll be good to move. But you all are going to be helping me know whether things are clear, right? When you think things are clear, that's when I can think things are clear. And so as you think about sort of what's likely to happen, think about what you think is going to happen and how comfortable you are, and that can be a guide for you, hopefully, to give you a sense. Because one of the things that it always strikes me is that in things like this, like you all are watching the policymaker talk, and it's almost as if that you forget, or my audiences forget, they are the economy. Like you are the ones who actually make things move and evolve. And so I would just ask you, like, pay attention to yourselves. Like you're doing real things. You're making real decisions in real time in response to the environment that's around. And that's information. And don't take that for granted, because we certainly don't.
You know, people out there are doing real things and making decisions. Some of them are making decisions on longer-term rates. The committee, the Fed sets the overnight rate, but recently the longer-term rates have not been behaving, right? They have not been following the cues of the Fed in some respects. What would you say about the divergence between market-determined long-term rates and the policy rate?
So when I think about interest rates in general, I think about, one is it's a fee for service, right? They're going to give you money now, and so it's money they can't use. They want a fee for that. Then they have to project the likelihood they're going to get repaid, and that's a little bit about your profile, but it's also a little bit about what they think the world's going to turn out to be in that interim, right? And so, and then they have to figure, if I were going to get money myself, what would the cost of that be? The Fed funds rate is just the last of those three things, right? And so long rates can move because they feel like they get charged a higher fee, right? That the ask is more significant than it used to be, or that they think the future has got a lot of risk in it that they're uncomfortable about, and so they want to get paid for that too, for taking that on. I look around, we started with uncertainty. In some circles, uncertainty equals risk, right? And to the extent that that is a prevailing reality, you might expect long rates to diverge, right? Because we're just the overnight thing. And we're pretty sure we know it's going to happen overnight. You get 6 months out, 8 months out, 5 years out, 10 years out, you start to think, well, this could go a lot of different ways. And so the fee I'm going to charge to take on that risk is going to be higher. And I think that's been a component of what's been going on.
You're in a wait-and-see mode. Last fall, of course, everyone believed the Fed was in a rate-cutting mode and headed toward something called neutral, the neutral rate. Can you explain what the neutral rate is, what you think it is, and why it's important?
So for me, when I think about the neutral rate, it's the policy rate that is neither accelerating the economy or slowing it down. It's just a rate that just allows the economy to stand on its own. There are risks, there are temporal risks. You have to cover the cost for that. You hit that number, and then let the economy do what it needs to do. It is actually the ideal space if you can get there, because our mandate is to stable prices and maximum employment, but really is to set a baseline environment, a foundation for the economy, where every actor in the economy has confidence that they know where it's going to be 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 7 years from now. Right? And if we do that well, then people will make maximum investments. They'll make investments to maximize either their business's productivity, their personal human capital, however it is, and the economy winds up being the strongest possible thing. Right? And so if our goal is always to be to neutral, and we only want to be in other places when fluctuations hit, when there are shocks that move the economy out of that space. Because once you get out of that space, if expectations are that, prices are going to be a whole lot higher 3 years from now, then there are going to be some investments that aren't going to make sense anymore. There will be some choices you're going to take off the table, which could leave us collectively worse off. And so that's our task, and it's quite important.
Adrian, I have two more softball questions, and then we'll go to the audience. Productivity growth. We've had a nice spurt of productivity growth in the last couple of years. Can you explain how that's important to the economy?
So the nice thing about, well, first of all, we have seen productivity increase. And what's been interesting is that it's increased more in this country than in other parts of the world. So that has allowed our economy to continue to grow without seeing a lot of pricing pressure. Because if workers are more productive, you're getting more output without having to change your cost basis that much, right? And that's better for everyone. And it's one of the conversations we've been having about how long can GDP stay at the strong level that it's been without seeing this pricing pressure. And productivity is an important piece to that. So we're going to keep looking at that. There are lots of other ways that productivity might reveal itself. You might think of, say, AI, and generative AI can allow people to do things. I was at Harvard over the weekend, and I was talking to some professors, and they said the amount of time they now need to build a slide deck or build a lesson plan has been reduced dramatically because they have these tools that allow them to produce the same thing in a much, much less time. And that kind of productivity, to the extent it starts showing up in multiple places across our broader economy and business sectors, you could see productivity accelerate in a pretty significant way.
Okay, my final question. There's been a lot of concern and discussion in press, particularly about Fed independence and how who could put pressure on Fed independence. Tell everybody why central bank independence is important and how you're going to navigate this period.
So I'll answer the second question first. Every day I'm in this job, I try to keep my eye on what we're asked to do. And that is evaluate the information that I have available to me, whether it be in the national data statistics, the responses that we get from surveys, or the feedback from conversations we have directly with individuals to deliver on stable prices and maximum employment. Full stop. I don't get into conversations back and forth, all that kind of stuff. Just keep your head down and just do the work that's required. There's plenty of it, so it's not like I wind up being bored or not having things to do. And that's what I try to do. The reason why it's so important is because long-run trajectory focus requires you to be able to be a little detached from things that are happening on the day-to-day, the week-to-week, the month-to-month. Because there are big things that happen in the short run. And if they become too significant, then we're going to start making compromises on our decision-making. And the independence gives us the ability to create that space so that we can do the right thing with that long-run perspective in mind. And we have to protect that. And there are instances, so there's been research done, there have been histories written about instances where central banks sacrifice some of that independence, some of that space, and the outcomes turned out to not be good. Right? And there's much more volatility in the economy, changes in terms of how investing played out, and negative impacts on aggregate growth. Right? So we want to avoid all those things. And it's that distance and that arm's length aspect that helps make that happen.
Dennis, thank you for those masterful softballs and hardballs and for hitting it out of the park. Let's open it up to questions for members. You do not need to be wearing yellow socks to do so. Daria, you get the first shot.
Thank you so much, Daria Faruqi. Thank you for this conversation. Rafael, I'm interested in your take on a couple of things and its implications for the effectiveness and, I guess, potency of monetary policy. So one is tariffs. Tariffs are here. And I'm curious about your take on how, monetary policy and interest rates will interplay with that and the ability to temper the economy. And then the second question is a little bit more about long-term dynamics, as there's an interest in this administration to, be more supportive of cryptocurrency and digital currencies, and that might drive stronger adoption. What's the impact of that on the ability for monetary policy and interest rates to really temper the economy? Curious on both those takes.
So I'll say two things on tariffs. So one, it was going to be an extended thing, so I'm going to apologize for this in advance. Look, tariffs are a type of a tax, right? And taxes pull resources out of the economy. How significant it is actually depends on the details of the tariff. What is it on? Is it everything? Is it targeted things? Who is it applied to? Big trading partners, small trading partners. Are they put in immediately or over time? Are they removed immediately or over time? Is there retaliation or not? Is the retaliation 1-to-1? Is it 2-to-1 or half-to-1? So all those details actually matter in terms of trying to draw a conclusion about where the economy is likely to go. And it's fluid, right? So if you had asked sort of or if you had done an assessment of what you thought would happen when you went to bed last night, it would be different than what you would think right now, right? And that's 16 hours, right? And so we're going to have to just watch. Like this is one, this is an evolving story, and we'll have to see how it is. In terms of the crypto, I don't really know. And crypto is a space that is still, is grown a lot. It is still a small portion of the broader financial system, right? And so it's not clear what it might substitute for, or I just don't know those things. And those are the things that we'll get more information on as that sector matures and to the extent that it grows. But right now, that's a wait and see thing.
Thank you. Let's go to this microphone over here. No statements and one question only, please.
I'm thinking of agriculture and home building and the undocumented workers and their participation in the labor market. And I'm wondering to what extent your models account for that and whether or not you believe it is significant, I apologize for that word, or insignificant going forward.
So I think the surveys suggest that there are some sectors that do rely on undocumented workers more than others. And to the extent that that's true, disruptions in that part of the labor supply could be significant. But this is one, I've heard arguments on this two ways. One is that the people who are being employed today are substituting for crowding out others being able to do the work. And another narrative is that they're substituting because there's no one who's willing to do the work. I think depending on how policy evolves, we're going to learn the answer to that question. And whichever one it is, that will determine what happens to supply, to prices, and to sort of the dynamics of those sectors.
John.
Thanks for being here, Raphael and Dennis. Let's go back to tariffs real quick. What would you say is the key to help us understand unintended consequences of these tariffs as we look ahead?
So I don't want to think I know what the intended consequences are to know what's unintended. Look, there will be responses when there's a change in the price structure. Some of it will be, we're going to buy fewer of the goods. Some of it is we're going to produce the goods somewhere else. Some of it is that we're going to find new trading partners. Some of it is we're just going to pay the extra money, right? And so there's all of those things, and there's the potential for significant overhauls of relationships, economic relationships. But in other instances, people are just going to absorb it, either the consumer or the business. And one of the things that we've been asking our businesses is, okay, if you're hit with a tariff, what are you likely to do? What they've told us is they all expect to pass it through 100%. Like that's their expectation. Now, it's one thing to expect it, it's another thing to do it. And so we'll actually have to see what happens, because if they do it and the consumers rebel, they may make a different decision, right? So experience can guide this in a pretty significant way. And this is one. I think the answer is going to vary, like product to product, sector to sector. And then we're going to have to do some kind of accounting or rolling up to figure out what the total story is.
Stephanie.
So if you look at the largest employer in the U.S., I believe it's Walmart with 1.6 million employees. The U.S. federal government, if you take aside the military and the U.S. Postal Service, employs about 2.6. So with the cuts to the civil service being contemplated and Musk and Doge being, streamlining, what does this mean for the economy? What does this mean for how AI takes over the functions of what a lot of humans were doing? And what does that mean to an increasing digital divide and for a whole population of folks that may not be able to access a lot of these streamlined kind of functions?
All right, there were a lot of assumptions in there. I'm trying not to get too far out ahead.
You're allowed to say, I don't know.
Of events. But I want to say it this way, in that we're seeing today a lot of action. There's a lot of energy. There's a lot of stuff happening. It is not clear what it adds up to until it adds up to something, right? And so this is another one where, like, everyone needs to watch, process, understand, interpret, and there's a short run, but the short run is bouncing, right? We're not at steady state yet, and we'll just have to see what that steady state turns out to be, and then once we understand that, then maybe I come back and we'll have that conversation.
Billy.
Raphael, you and Dennis have spent a lot of time in academia. And what I love about academia is that you're allowed to make assumptions, right? A world without taxes, or let's assume interest rates don't move over time. So I'd like to ask a question and apply a couple of assumptions. If you had an anonymous, direct communication to an open mind, what one or two things might you deliver to our current president without any fear of retribution and a belief that your words would be absorbed?
That's what I'm talking about.
Can you share one or two thoughts with us?
Now, you do know this is live streamed, right?
I am making a world of assumptions. You're an economist.
You want me to handle that?
Yeah, you can take that one. Like,
Step in, Dennis.
I'll give you a halfway serious answer to that.
It's a halfway serious question.
As we entered 2025, in my opinion, the economy was in a very good position, and there was more, even though these guys wouldn't say it, more downside than upside. More chance of screwing something up than improving it dramatically. So my message would be, don't screw up a good thing.
Well said. You, sir?
So I'm Kyle Wade with the food bank, and as Dennis just mentioned, and as you talked about, the economy by unemployment measure, GDP, other things, is in a really strong position, and yet there's also a prevailing sense that the economy is not working for a lot of people at the bottom and in the middle. One indicator of that is at the food bank, we're serving 60% more people today than we did 3 years ago, and a lot of that growth is among people who earn too much money to qualify for different federal benefit programs like SNAP. And so based on the data and research that your team's producing every day, what's your sense of really why the economy is not working for more of our neighbors? And what really needs to shift longer term to help the economy work for a bigger percentage of our population?
Well, so thank you for that question. And Kyle, we have a tagline at our bank, an economy that works for everyone. Like that's what we are striving to help achieve. And what we know is through the pandemic, the first part of the pandemic, people at the lower end of the income and wealth distribution actually fared quite well because they were the essential workers. They were the ones who needed to, relied upon for the economy to continue to perform in an extremely stressful time. The challenge happened when inflation spiked. Mm-hmm. And because they didn't have large reservoirs of savings, that caused them to eat through that faster than it did for others. And so we started hearing about 10 months ago about growing stress and precariousness for people at the lower end of the income and wealth distribution, hearing about substituting different products. We're not going to buy the name brand. Substituting maybe liquid detergent for pods because you could then do half a dose and stretch that out more. We started hearing all those things. And what has happened over time is that the income threshold where that is starting to appear has been rising, has been increasing. It's not the majority of the population. And importantly, the upper quarter of the population accounts for a disproportionate amount of spending. So you can get a lot of precariousness increase without it showing up in aggregate numbers in significant ways. So it's something you have to, we do pay attention to because it does have implications for what can happen. Like, what do you do with it? One, we try to make sure that networks of employment for good jobs, and good jobs mean a job that pays a wage such that you only need to have one job to cover your basic finances or expenses, are known, available, and that folks have the skills to do those things. Because in many instances, that's not what we have. It's being mindful about a workforce development system so that people can get the skills to compete for the jobs of tomorrow. Because those skills that you need to do those are quite different than the skills you needed to do many of the jobs that have existed in this economy. And so we want to try to create an infrastructure, an ecosystem, where every person has an opportunity to tap into things. And at our bank, we do this a lot. We have a Center for Workforce and Economic Opportunity to try to help communities figure out where those opportunities are. We have tools on our website that will give at a county level the professions that are most in need, that satisfy this good wage and not needing 5 years of education. And we're trying to be a partner to facilitate conversations at a regional level between employers and community colleges and the like, and workers, because many employers, they know the holes that they're going to have 5 years from now. Like everyone's doing, you all are doing this, right? You're looking at your workforce. You're like, we got a retirement issue. We got these things. We're going to need to backfill. And we should be having that conversation more publicly, so that we can make sure that everybody sees where opportunities are and has a chance to chase them.
Okay, one final question.
First of all, before I ask my question, I'd like to say, Dennis, you and Raphael have been talking these things for a long time. You're doing better every year, so let's give them a round of applause. My question has already been answered partially, but not completely. To Raphael, the question is, all this tariff and trade war going on, what kind of impact it's going to have on Region 6? That's the one you manage. And please be straight, don't wishy-washy.
Well, it's interesting. The 6th District is, on some level, a microcosm of the whole U.S. economy. If you do a distribution of activity across all the sectors in the 6th District, it looks almost exactly the same. The numbers are almost exactly the same as if you did the whole country. So we have a bit of everything in this district. What I would say is, when you talk about the U.S. economy, it's not just one economy. You have some places that are super strong, they're growing a lot. Atlanta's one of them. You see cranes all over the place. You see businesses coming here. But then you have other places that are not doing very well. And you have 2 hours in directions from here, and you'll be in places where the towns are, they're wondering what their existence is going to be, and everything in between, right? And so what I would say, as a district, we're moving pretty well, but I would caution to not let the top line aggregate story cause you to think that, well, there's nothing to do. There's nothing to worry about. There aren't ways that we can get 10% better. Because collectively, I think there are those opportunities. And as we think about making an economy that works for everyone, we want to make sure that it's truly everyone. And if we do that well, then the resilience of the economy will be better. The ideas that emerge from that economy will be more productive and more innovative. And ultimately, we'll have a greater and more prosperous quality of life.
Dennis?
Raphael, I enjoy doing this every year. Thank you for the invitation, and I want to present you with a souvenir hardball for.
Thank you. I have
Well done.
But you didn't sign it. Like,
I'll sign it.
Oh, okay.
We'll sign it, Dennis Lockhart. Before we adjourn, Raphael, on a serious note, I wanted to bring it back to Atlanta and our club. And I said to both of you all what engaged Rotarians you have been since I've known you all. If you're not in Washington, you're rolling your sleeves up helping us pack books or helping with a program. You think about an economy that works for everyone, we think about service above self. What is the call to action for this club where we can partner to engage and impact our community from your seat?
I think the call to action, go meet some people from places that you don't usually go and try to understand them, understand where they are in their journey, because that can create ways, there may be simple things to do that can make big differences in people's lives. One of the things it always worries me that folks think they have to do the giant thing. There's got to be the big splash to be meaningful and helpful to a region, and that's not true. And I think remembering that all the time and looking for opportunities to do small things, if we all do small things, it winds up being a big thing. And so that's what I would say.
Walk a mile in others' shoes, and it's the little things that count. I appreciate that insight. Before we thank our panel one more time, I want to remind people we will not be having Rotary on February the 17th in observance of President's Day. Prior to that, we're going to have a reprise of the Lonnie and Clyde show. A lot of technology has changed in the last 3 years since the last time Lonnie, our member, spoke to our club. And then on February the 24th, we'll have Melody Hobson here as the former board chair of Starbucks and co-CEO of Ariel Investments. And hot off the presses, on March the 10th, we will be welcoming Grant Hill to the stage, basketball player and sports executive, and he will be interviewed none other by Raphael Bostek. So we'll look forward to that. Thank you so much for a very engaging program. The meeting is adjourned.